We now come to chapter 12, Cultivation. This is the analysis of the fourth noble truth, and in terms of the picture, the graphic, then the picture has widened and opened, and all of the knotwork that was framing these statements on either side has now become much more expansive and floral, beautiful lotus flowers, and still threads of knotwork in the border, just as the flower stems woven together, and the mandala at the top, and then a Buddha walking down below. The Pali reads, Idang dukkha-nirodha gamini patipada aryasa chanti me bhikkhave pupe ananusutesu dhammesu chakung udapadi, jnanang udapadi, panya udapadi, vijja udapadi, aloko udapadi. Tanko panitang dukkha-nirodha gamini patipada aryasa chang pave tabanti me bhikkhave pupe ananusutesu dhammesu chakung udapadi, jnanang udapadi, panya udapadi, vijja udapadi, aloko udapadi. Tanko panitang dukkha-nirodha gamini patipada aryasa chang bhavitanti me bhikkhave pupe ananusutesu dhammesu chakung udapadi, jnanang udapadi, panya udapadi, vijja udapadi, aloko udapadi. We also have, in addition, we've got a few wild animals, a deer grazing in the deer park, and foliage of the forest growing up at the side, and then the beautiful open pale blue of the infinite sky up above. The translation reads, There is this noble truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. This noble truth must be penetrated too by cultivating the path, bhaveta banti. And lastly, this noble truth has been penetrated too by cultivating the path. Such was the vision, insight, wisdom, knowing, and light that arose in me about things not heard before. This illustration shows a more dramatic change of style. Cessation is only the beginning. It should not be taken as a final deliverance. Having insights and then making too much of them can be an obstacle. In a moment, a great sense of realization may dawn, and the mind can become very clear and peaceful. That may occur for a few minutes, or even days, sometimes without practicing anything at all. There is the cessation. Some people still try to understand the meaning of a mystical experience of oneness that they had a decade ago. In a sense, it has subsequently spoiled their practice because they continue to remember that experience and wish to repeat it again, or wonder whether it was really valid and where it went, and are unable to start afresh. Sometimes people turn up at the monastery claiming to be arahants, enlightened ones, and bodhisattvas. The arahants are difficult enough. They don't want to fit in with the routines and help out, and they expect special treatment. But the bodhisattvas are even worse, because they feel obliged to tell you how you've got it all wrong, and want to set up a teaching program. We had a bodhisattva at Chithurst Monastery once, but he couldn't tolerate anything cooked in a Teflon-coated pan, or any processed food like white sugar or white rice. So he left. So this is he's being kind of jokey there, but also it's not. It's also not a joke, and that the grasping of spiritual experience and identification with it is something that is found from time to time in most spiritual communities of various different kinds. And I remember many, either that someone grasps it and becomes inflated, saying, I am the all-enlightened one, and yes, you're very lucky to meet me, and now your life has changed from here on, and then become a real pain in the neck for everyone that they encounter and they live with. Or it can be quite tragic and painful. I remember many years ago meeting a fellow who had been injured in a mining accident in Australia. He was part of the team putting explosive charges in the rock face at the end of the tunnels in this mining operation, and somebody had, so it was a long tunnel that sloped down to the rock face, and with a little rail track for the carts to take all the broken rock out. And one of the people in the yard had forgotten to put the brake on the wagons, and then these rail wagons rolled down into the tunnel. So this fellow was putting the explosive charges into the rock face. Then he heard this sort of rumbling sound, and he realized that there was a wagon on its way, and he literally had nowhere to go. There was like solid rock behind him, and he said it's about a foot on either side about 6 inches on either side of the wagon, and about 18 inches above. And so he knew that the only chance he had to survive possibly was to as the wagon was about to hit him, to jump over the front of the wagon and to try and land inside before it hit the rock and everything blew up. And so that's what he did. And there was this huge explosion and crashing, and then when he came to, he found, even though that he later on discovered that his leg had been smashed completely, that his initial experience was one of sort of kind of confusion. He didn't really realize what had happened, and then slowly it became clear to him, and that he realized he was still alive, and that he was down in the bottom of this tunnel. And so he thought, well, how can I let people know that I'm alive or communicate? So there was some water pipes that ran along the side of the tunnel, and he took a little stone and started tapping on the pipe to try and get the sound to echo up at the top of the workings. And then, as he said, he was lying there and in total darkness, and then just tapping this pipe with the stone. And suddenly this stone that he could feel in his hand, that became the whole universe, was just that feeling of the stone in his hand. And then his mind went into this extraordinarily powerful mystical experience, a sense of total clarity and peacefulness and unity with all things, and a quality of timelessness. And he said he has no real idea of how long he was down in the tunnel until they dug him out. But the experience was stayed with him long after that they'd sort of rescued him and carried him out. And he said a week later he was lying there in the hospital, and they'd had to amputate the remains of his leg, and so he lost one of his legs from the knee down. And but he was still in this beatific state in the hospital, and the guy who'd forgotten to put the brake on the truck, who had been in a terrible state and full of regret and fear, he eventually came to see him, and he was very tearful and upset, and oh, I'm terribly sorry, Alex, it's my fault, I ruined your life. And Alex said, I was sitting there like the Cheshire Cat with this huge grin on my face, saying, look, no, you don't understand, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me, this is great. And he said, no, it's all right, you don't have to put a brave face on, it's all right, He says, no, I mean it, I am absolutely fine. You look terrible, but I'm fine. And so that state of say clarity and peacefulness it's lasted for several weeks, and then it faded away as he came out of the hospital, and then it got back to his regular life, or reassembling his life, and it faded away. And then he said he spent the next 10 years in this terrible depressed state, because he said after you've been the universe, it's really hard to deal with the traffic in Sydney, or to be talking with the wife and kids, and worrying about making the payments on the TV. It's like somehow it doesn't really matter that much, and so it was a real struggle for him, and his mind became very, very depressed. And it wasn't until he ended up arriving in Britain a number of years later, and then coming across Buddhism through meeting a fellow called Russell Williams up in the Manchester area. Then he found that the Buddha's teachings had a way of putting all that together and giving him an explanation of what had happened to him, and also a way of practicing. But he said that 10 years was utter misery, even though what had caused it was absolutely blissful, and he felt it was the most real thing that he'd ever experienced in his life, and far more real than ordinary waking perceptual so-called reality. But that was a cause of immense suffering because of not understanding it and not having a context for it. But then having a contact with Buddha Dhamma then helped to give him a framework for that. So continuing. Not everyone becomes so deluded, but people who do have valid insights into not-self and experiences of cessation that get distorted. It's easy to get attached to insights and to assume that you have become something. I recall in the early years of my practice having what seemed to me to be realizations of truth, and then the mind going on about them incessantly. Sometimes it would take days for the mind to clear and relate to the here and now. I was so full of these great insights that I would get lost in thoughts and mental states and forget to clean my hut. Sometimes I'd feel that the experience of cessation or insight was just a fantasy, but it was not necessarily the case. The problem was either taking cessation as self, or thinking one doesn't have a self, or sundry permutations on this theme. As the Buddha put it, this is how he attends unwisely. Was I in the past? Was I not in the past? How was I in the past? Having been, what was I in the past? And similar patterns of present and future. One of 6 kinds of view arises in him. The view of self exists for me, or the view no self exists for me. Or I perceive self with self, or I perceive not self with self, or I perceive self with not self. It is this myself that speaks and feels and that experiences here or there the ripening of good and bad actions. That's from the Sabhasava Sutta in the middle-length discourses. As the last of the above views points out, the self-view affects our activities, motivation and sense of achievement. It becomes extremely helpful then to live in a way that constantly asks something of you and trains you to relate to the here and now without self-consciousness. It's equally helpful to see the whole process of life as one of not gaining anything, even liberation. Then that whole goal-oriented way of thinking is discouraged. This, in a nutshell, is the practice of sustaining insights and letting go, the cultivation of the 4th Noble Truth. So a couple of things on that. There's a very useful teaching, it's called the Panchataya Sutta, not the punctured tire, but the Panchataya means the 5 and the 3, and it's a sutta number 102, I think, in the middle-length discourses. Panchataya Sutta, and in that, towards the end of the sutta, the Buddha makes these comments. He said, it may be that some good person is practicing meditation, and their mind is clear and focused. They are completely mindful. They're attentive. Their heart is at peace, and they have this experience of freedom. He said, and then in the mind of that meditator, then they have the thought, I am at peace. I am without clinging, I have realized Nibbana. And then he makes this very beautiful and pertinent comment that says, the very way that the mind phrases it demonstrates the clinging that is still there. I am, and in the Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of it, then yet he puts the I in the in italics, saying, I am at peace, I am without clinging, I have realized Nibbana. So the very way the mind phrases it demonstrates the clinging that is still there, and so that good person is thereby sort of demonstrating that there's still attachment, even though the experience, the subjective experience, is like, wow, this is great, that the liberation at last. But there's that invisible kind of attachment, and then the Buddha says that one who is truly wise and awake recognizes the origination, the disappearance, and the escape with respect to the 6 sense bases, so that whatever is seen, heard, smelt, tasted, touched, cognized through the mind, the mind that is really awake sees that arising, sees the cessation of that, and then sees the escape, the nisarana, in relationship to the six bases of contact, the six forms of sense contact: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. So that's a really useful statement of that, and it describes this kind of subtle attachment. And as Ajahn Sucitto says, it can be either conceit, like, I'm enlightened, I'm liberated, and then the mind attaching to that, or that having just been an experience that then is lost, like that friend up in the north of England. Also, with Ajahn Chah's way of dealing with this, a kind of condition, if someone came to him and proclaimed their enlightenment, then there was usually a bit of a workout involved, or someone. I think maybe Ajahn Sumedho was actually there at this time when someone, a monk, came to visit Ajahn Chah and told him that he was an anagami, a non-returner. And Ajahn Chah says, "Oh, you're an anagami. Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, well done." Yes. In my village, the word anagami is another word for mangy dog. Like a dog with a skin disease, a mangy dog, and to be compared to a dog in Thailand is pretty about as low as you can get, and a really kind of nasty insult. And so the would-be anagami said, "What do you mean?" and got quite upset, and how dare you? I can't believe that's true, and got really irritated. And he said, "Oh, an anagami that still experiences anger—that's a new thing." So he was just prodding to see what was there, and lo and behold, the anagami had not quite made it through the dosa. And there was another occasion. There was a monk. Even before he came to visit and live with Luang Por Chah, he was very, very gifted in meditation, even when he was very young, and he could absorb his mind into very deep states of concentration, but he had a tendency to show off, and so he used to do things like he would go and sit in meditation in the local in the middle of the local town, in the town square, and then just and people would come up to him, or sort of some people would be making offerings and such like, or other kids would come and poke him with sticks or things, and you just sit there in total absorption. So anyway, when he came to stay with Luang Por Chah, Luang Por could see that even though he was a very gifted meditator, he was quite attached to both the fame of being a good meditator, but also just wanting to always be in that absorbed state. So, of course, Luang Por made him his attendant. And as you might get the picture, when the way Ajahn Chah functioned was that he was pretty much from about 3 a.m, when the bell rang for people to get up in time for the morning chanting, morning meditation. Ajahn Chah was up and about and involved all the way through till usually about midnight, and so the attendant needed to be there and on the job, and so Luang Por contrived to never let this monk sit still. That as soon as he would be sitting there receiving people or giving a Dhamma talk, and then he'd say, I need my other teeth for the betel nut. Go and get my different teeth, or like we need some. This water needs to be freshened up. Go and get some more water. And as soon as the monk was sort of sitting there, thinking, okay, now I can close my eyes and just be. Like Luang Por would get him up and get him moving, and not allow him to sort of sit there with his eyes closed. And he said he kept not getting the point for a long time in that role, and eventually they had this particular escapade where Luang Por Chah took him and went for an extensive teaching tour, to visit to various different branches and giving talks and going to ceremonies, and it was a 6-day trip, and Luang Por Chah didn't sleep for 6 days and 6 nights, and he wouldn't let his attendant sleep either. And so he was just kept going day and night for 6 days and 6 nights. And the monk in question said, "Yeah, I still didn't get that this was a teaching." Yeah. And he said eventually they were sitting in the front of this pickup truck, and he was just like delirious, as kind of couldn't keep his eyes open at all. And as soon as he would just start nodding, Ajahn Chah would kind of whack him in the ribs and say, "Wake up! You're disgracing the sangha. You're embarrassing me in front of the driver. What kind of a monk are you? Don't you know how to behave properly?" And giving him one in the ribs, and to get the point across, to in a way cut through that sense of conceit, or I am the accomplished one, and it had a certain amount of good effect. But this is the mark of a really kind and compassionate teacher, that if someone comes and says, "Lumpur, I have to tell you, I've reached realization," then the teacher will help you to get some perspective on that and say, "Well, is it true or is it not?" And Ajahn Chah himself said that after he had come to the conclusion that he had finished his own practice and had nothing more to accomplish, he said he tested himself for 3 years to see whether he was inflated in his view of things, or whether it was actually genuine. So he kind of pushed himself to see whether there was anything still attached in there for 3 years. So that process of being cautious, not ready to jump to conclusions as soon as you've had a beautiful, peaceful meditation, that's it. This is fantastic. This is great. It's downhill from here on. It's usually the moment to check your seatbelt and to ask for some feedback from your friends, as per the discussion we had about moha and delusion the other day. As soon as you might have those thoughts and perceptions, get some feedback from your friends and see what they have to say. Say, actually, yeah, we've been worried about you for the last couple of weeks. Insight into this truth gives rise to path knowledge, knowing there is a way rather than having a one-off experience that becomes something personal and part of one's self-identity. Put into a proper perspective, the experience of cessation brings about a greater willingness to work within the world of conventional appearance, limitation, restrictions, things going wrong, things going right, and so on. The awakened mind sees all that dispassionately. Knowing there's nothing to be liberated from except ignorance gives much scope for living insightfully. This is how he attends wisely. This is suffering, and this is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering, and this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. So also, going back to his point about I was so full of these great insights that I forgot to clean my kuti, that would be also that, as it says here, the experience of cessation brings about a greater willingness to work within the world of conventional appearances and limitation and restriction. So rather than that liberating insight, meaning that you get more disconnected or indifferent to the material world, if it's genuine, then it'll make the mind more attentive and more careful and more attuned to the material world and the people around you, and the effect that things have upon you, and the effect that you have upon things. So in this picture, speaking about his drawing, the upper lines that before were a cage have now turned inside out to form what is reminiscent of a sun and also of a dance. This reminds me of the old image of old-fashioned dances where people formed circles with interlocked arms as seen from above. Along the sides, flowers again, 8 of them in a flowing motif that is symbolic of the Eightfold Path. Down at the bottom is the Buddha, walking with the mudra of teaching in the world, which was explained in the earlier frame on the Eightfold Path. Behind him is a triple-armed figure that is a symbol of virtue, meditation, and wisdom. the threefold aspect of the path. All around are animals, plants, all that is begotten, born and dies. And it is through this world that the Buddha is walking in a serene way. So that is the threefold motif. Again, it's using the sort of Celtic imagery behind the Buddha there, the three-armed sort of triangular wheel form behind the Buddha there. And it's also interesting that those words, all that is begotten, born and dies, comes from that same Sailing to Byzantium, that poem of W.B. Yeats, which begins, "That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, that dying generation at their song, the salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, all fish, flesh, fowl, commend all summer long, whatever is begotten, born and dies. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of unaging intellect." So that is no country for old men, like we were having in the discussion before. But so it's a lot to do with Yeats bewailing his identification with being an old man and yearning for the beyond as something separate and other, and that in this sort of paradisical world, the salmon falls, the waterfalls with salmon kind of leaping over them, the salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas filled with fishes, all fish, whatever is begotten, born and dies, all of the living, multiplying, fertile world, all fish, flesh, fowl, commend all summer long, whatever is begotten, born and dies. Caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of unaging intellect, meaning the sort of insight into that reality which is beyond. By being intoxicated with the living, breathing, fertile, multiplying world, then that which is beyond that is the mind ignores that or misses that. The Buddha described his own experience of fully awakening in a particular way. It wasn't just a momentary flash, but a thorough review of the way the mind works, and, with each realization, the Buddha later commented, "But I allowed no pleasant feeling that arose in me to gain power over my mind." The night under the Bodhi tree culminated in the realizations of the Four Noble Truths, as well as the insight into the origin, cessation and path leading to the cessation of the asava. Asava, which I have previously translated as unknowing inaction, literally means outflow. The implication of the word suggests that, like a leak in a dam, it has the nature of creating further and more damaging outflows. Scholars' minds have strained to find a suitable equivalent in English to fully convey its meaning. The archaic cankers doesn't mean very much nowadays, and the relatively inactive sounding taints is quite common. Perhaps with further explanation, outflows will be the most useful term. So as I was mentioning before, the word asava has both the connotation of flow, something like that's liquid and in a fluid movement, but also has the connotations of rot or corruption or decay. So I.B. Horner was was fond of the term cankers. A canker is like an infection that like a sort of a pussy, inflamed infection that will end up leaking and letting its contents trickle out. Taints, it also has that quality of corruption, but not so much the image of flowing. So personally, outflows is the translation that I prefer. It's one of those terms also that is quite common as a synonym for arahantship is kinasava, like which you can translate as the stopping of the outflows. Kina is something that has ended, Khina, kina. So the I.B. Horner translates it as canker waned, that the waning being sort of to reduce or diminish or to end. And so you get this rather strange term of canker waned arahants. That it sounds like some sort of horrible skin disease it's something they just got over, but what it means is that their minds are not getting caught up or flowing out into and getting entangled in things. In this context, the Buddha described 3 outflows, 3 ways in which the mind rushes out in avalanche mode. These may be listed as the outflow of sensuality, that's kamasava, or belief in the sensory description of reality, the outflow of becoming, which is bhavasava, and the outflow of ignorance, avijjasava. The mind rushes into those modes of perceptual activity the way that water heads towards the sea down a gradient. Although there is volition, no conscious effort is necessary. Because of this, by and large, the outflows go unnoticed. Like water doesn't need to make an effort to flow downhill, it's just the gravity pulls it. There's no conscious effort that pulls the water out to flow, but it flows because of the great pull of gravitation. Those who have no interest in awakening will generally find themselves not questioning the veracity of the responses and perceptions that their sense faculties make with objects. Such is the power of the sensory outflow, kamasava. Despite the changing and unsatisfactory nature of sensory experiences, we find ourselves falling in love with new and refined ones. Exquisite states of mind bowl us over in the same way that glamorous movie stars used to. As in the case of the Arahant, quote-unquote, and the Bodhisattva, quote-unquote, above, and in my own experience, interest in mental stimulation is one of the causes for grasping at insight. One can become quite intoxicated with thoughts or with the mental feeling of bliss or confidence that may come with insight. Spiritual adepts can become skilled at producing and even radiating such feelings. They may even be convinced from the refinement of the feelings that they have realized enlightenment. But when the outflow of sensuality is still active, and one is moved by feelings, refined or otherwise, what one is experiencing is something other than the freedom of enlightenment. So this is a very significant point. I was also talking about those sort of grasping at those insights that the so-called Arahant and Bodhisattva had, and this is also something that the Buddha talked about. There's qualities called the vipassana upakilesa, the defilements of insight that are listed, and they are things like all-encompassing knowledge, radiance, unremitting energy, unremitting mindfulness. So these are kilesa, they're defilements, but they're the defilements of insight. So these are listed in the teachings, and that there's a kind of history of how people misunderstand them or have got caught up in those. And anyone who's been on meditation retreats or lived in monasteries for some time will know, as occasionally people get caught up in those kind of states, usually on a quiet or silent meditation retreat or solitary meditation retreat. Usually it's to do with the mind getting too absorbed or grasping the effects of concentration and brightness of mind, clarity of mind, without having a lot of feedback or friends support from their kalyana mitta. So this is called vipassana upakilesa, is one term that there's lists these qualities. There's 16 of them in that, and there's also another kind of a set of similar difficulties that are called sanya vipalasa. Sanya means perception. Vipalasa means that the wrong grasping of perception. So those two are related. There's a lot of overlap between the two, the vipassana upakilesa or the sanya vipalasa. So these are all kinds of meditation illness, if you like, or the wrong grasping of wholesome states, or states of concentration, states of insight, states of understanding. It's very interesting that in the a particular sutra out of the Chinese tradition, from the northern Buddhist canon, called the Shurangama Sutra, which is the main meditation teaching for the Chan school in China. So it's very well known and a very important text to communities like the City of 10,000 Buddhas and the disciples of Master Xuanhua. And the Shurangama Sutra, it speaks a lot about meditation methods, and particularly it's also it describes a meditation on the sound of silence, and it describes that as being the most effective method for enlightenment. There's a series of, I think, 28 or 30 different bodhisattvas come to the Buddha, and they describe their own method of enlightenment. And it's the last one, Avalokiteshvara, Guan Yin, describes to the Buddha this method of meditation based upon hearing, and and it's called returning the hearing to listen to the self nature, is one translation of it. So a lot of the sutra is describing these different meditation methods, and then ends up pointing to that method of inner listening as being the best. But the last section of the sutra is called the 50 skandha demon states, and in a way it takes all of those qualities described in terms of sanya vipalasa, the wrong grasping of perception and meditation experience, and the upakilesa, the defilements of insight, and it lists them in relationship to the 5 khandhas. So you have, for each of the 5 khandhas, you've got 10 kinds of meditation illness, if you like. And so it goes from the very coarse, connected to Rupa Khandha, all the way through to the last 10, which are connected to Vijnana Khandha, the consciousness Khandha. And those latter stages, the ones connected to the Vijnana Khandha and also Sankhara Khandha, the last 20, are all the kind of meditation problems or meditation illnesses experienced by people who already have quite a lot of accomplishment, that are like stream enterers or once returners, non-returners. And the people who do have a degree of accomplishment, but they are still being attached or getting caught up with identification with those states, and each of those 50 skandha demon states, there's a description of how they're characterized, or how the people who have those kind of problems present themselves. And it's very interesting seeing how some of the statements that are described there can almost be taken out of the mouths of some of the modern day gurus that we know and love, and that you come across in spiritual literature. But the reason why I mention it is that with each of those 50 states, there's a particular phrase that is used, that is for every single one of them, and it's the phrase is, if they know it is a state, it is a good state, but if they don't know it is a state, they are bound to fall. So if someone has that kind of blazing insight, all-encompassing knowledge, unremitting energy, if there's a knowledge that, or recognition that, well, this is a beautiful state, or this is a very wholesome state. This is a state. It's not me and mine. It's not something that I am or that I've got or that is who and what I am. If they know it's a state, it's a good state. If they don't know that it's a state, then they are bound to fall. And I feel that's an extremely useful and key element in that. If you know that this is a state, then those powerful and say compelling experiences can all be put to very good use. But as soon as there's that, I am at peace, I am without clinging, I have realized nibbana, like ding, there'll be you're bound to fall. And so that's good to bear in mind. There's we have an edition of the Shurangama Sutra that was produced by the City of 10,000 Buddhas. It's in 8 volumes. It's got Master Hua's commentary as well, and the 50 skandha demon states are the whole of the 8th volume. So it makes interesting reading. Now, becoming is a powerful instinct that has already been explained. In its latent form as an outflow, it gives rise to the mood that looks for or dreads results instead of appreciating the present. I'll read that again. Becoming is a powerful instinct that has already been explained. In its latent form as an outflow, it gives rise to the mood that looks for or dreads results, instead of appreciating the present. So we're never able to appreciate the quality of our efforts or our stillness. This is not to suggest that we should be inactive, but that our activity can be appreciated for its goodness of intention and the skillfulness of its enactment, rather than be dogged by the nagging furies of targeted goals. So being able to appreciate there is this, rather than, oh, just over there, something really a lot better. It's important to understand that this outflowing energy to get ahead and make things the way we want them to be is by no means all that we have access to. It's quite normal for people to apply themselves to a task for its own sake, without the compulsion to become something, or any hope for a reward. We call it pure love or devotion. Another more helpful recollection for our active side is of the spirit of play. This avoids the pitfall of emotional attachment. Play can employ a lot of energy, concentration and mindfulness. It doesn't have to be inane or fatuous. Drama itself arose out of a religious enactment and came to represent archetypes and models of human behavior that would have an instructive quality. Similarly, art and poetry were originally sacred play, sometimes bringing forth the finest qualities that a person had in order to portray aspects of the human situation. The spiritual path is play in a like fashion, an enactment of the highest values, of the faculties of wakefulness. In this, becoming something is completely irrelevant. One doesn't believe that one is enlightened, nor that one is not. The self-view is not being engaged. And the spiritual path is the supreme play because the script and the stage, or the raw materials, are our lives. Play is also adventurous and challenging, and the personal fulfillment is dependent on the balance between commitment and dispassion. Then there is the necessary energy in the application without the burden of self-consciousness. The self has been consumed in the purity of the action. When we use the insight into play, the plot and the scenario of our activity are not crucial. It's how we act within them that's important. Bringing the stage into the theatre of the mind, we can develop skill in working with thoughts and feelings, activity, calm or confusion. This is liberating. Living in the present does not mean to consider nothing other than the tip of the nose, but that we are able to know plans about the future and memories arising as now, and having only a notional, penciled-in existence. Do we find ourselves panicking or procrastinating? Failures and successes can be appraised and learnt from rather than stored up in memory. This is why, in Dhamma practice, the reference is to skillful and unskillful rather than good and bad. So in that spirit, I feel he's very skillful in talking about play and theatre and such like. That it's interesting, as I understand it, that the Greek theatres were originally like the psychiatric hospitals. That was the basic therapeutic treatment, was to go to the theatre where you'd see comedy and tragedy, these archetypal human dramas being carried out in front of you, people being rewarded, people being betrayed, people experiencing tragic loss, people experiencing great blessings, and also the encouragement to laugh at the comedies and to weep and to empathize at the tragedies. That by seeing those archetypal events being carried out before us, then there's a way that there's something in the heart says, yeah, I know that kind of loss, that terrible heartbreak, or that feeling of the desire for vengeance. That I'll even kill my own children to get even with that husband of mine. That the kind of yes, I know that feeling. Can then, even though on a practical level, maybe a person would never even think of doing that, but seeing, say, Medea killing her children to get even with her husband, then that portrayal of that kind of a feeling can say, yeah, I know that feeling. Yeah, that's. But also look where it goes. Look what the results are of that. So by seeing those archetypal qualities being enacted in front of us, then we're able to, in a sense, process those urges and compulsions in ourselves, also with comedy, being able to laugh at them, the gains and losses. And so this is something that people like Freud and Jung had great insight into, and and it seems that was the role of theatre, and that apparently, so I am told, that the theatres used to be next to the temples, so that they were the spiritual nature of that kind of release that came through visiting the theatre was very much connected to the spiritual process that people were also involving themselves in, or giving themselves to at the religious temples themselves. Also, it brings to mind a particular kind of approach to practice that I use in terms of learning to listen to thought, which is to see the voices of our mind as a committee. You can, or like in a play, you have the dramatis personae, the characters of the play. That rather than thinking of ourselves as one single unified mind, one individual person, we can, if you look at the mind, you see there's the cool rationalist, the emotional reactive, the serious spiritual warrior, the whining 3-year-old, all of those different characters. We all have our own cast of characters, I'm sure. I'm not reading anybody's mind. This is just by seeing how we operate as people, but by looking at the mind as a more like as a stage for the theatre, and seeing these different, or a committee room, these different members of the committee sit down around the table, and you hear these different voices, different urges of reason, or emotion, or childishness, or authority that that just are going on. That if we are able to put wisdom and mindfulness, satipanya, as into the chair, that if satipanya is chairing the meeting, or is the theatre director, then you get a coherent and useful conversation going on, or a rewarding performance, so that say refiguring or looking at our minds in a different way, and then can be very rewarding and beneficial. So I'll leave it there for today, and open things up for conversation, discussion, questions. Is there anything to ask about? Martin, yeah.
Yeah. You've spoken very well about the usefulness of various art forms, drama, poetry, prose, and of course we've got the pictorial representations, the usefulness of that, but no word about music. There are some very fine insights from music, even, well, go back to Bach and Matthew Paschen, one of the greatest works written. But later on, Rosavara's Cantus Arcticus, which we gave at Esma's funeral, and other things like that. Steve Reich's Different Trains. I found a lot, music means a great deal to me, intellectually, as well as from the pure pleasure point of view. It's not just pleasure, it's insight as well. So I wondered why I suppose it would absorb a lot of the time of monastics if they took an interest in music.
Well, we chant a lot.
Yes.
But it's also a cultural. There's a cultural element to it as well, insofar as that in the time of the Buddha, music was very much associated with the search for sense pleasure, and so that there wasn't there doesn't seem to have been any such thing as religious music at the Buddha's time. That came later with people like Kabir and the Bhakti yoga and the sort of devotional songs, and that whole dimension of the Vedic tradition, Hindu tradition, was much later, after the Buddha's time. So spiritual music is a bit of a more modern invention, and so that particularly in terms of the Theravada world, because it's the way of the elders and it has that constantly referring back to the original times and original standards, then it's always had a sort of non-musical brief, if you like. In the northern Buddhist world, then they have a lot more music, like in China and Tibet. There's a lot of instruments that they use in pujas, horns and cymbals and drums, so that musical element is far more a part of things, and their chanting is also quite deliberately far more musical in some respects. I think it's for every individual to learn how to skillfully use the sense world, because nowadays there is music that does have a spiritual quality that helps lead the mind towards clarity, towards peacefulness, towards inspiration, spiritual inspiration, and it's not just sort of sense desire. As a part of our monastic training, that doesn't feature within it. We had the Bhakti Underground here for a few years. The Sister Abhasra and Sister Miranandi were very active in that little kind of side trip. But it was also Sister Abhasra who was the one who put all our chanting. She created the melodic form for our chanting because of her own background in music. And so she had a lot of music in her, still does, and so that this was not a vehicle that really fitted her, but she really gave herself wholeheartedly to monastic life. But after 7 or 8 years, it sort of was not something that would be sort of contained, and so it needed an outlet. And so she found an outlet through creativity in terms of there's Hindu bhajans and such like, also through putting our own chanting to a melodic form. But then she realized that it's not a good fit, and that she decided to go with her music rather than the monastic training. And very poignantly, she, without really thinking about it very much, she wrote a requiem for her monastic life. There's the Latin requiem mass. She wrote a requiem mass for her monastic life, and she composed it on the organ at Nettleton Church. So it's quite a magnificent. It's absolutely marvelous. I asked her permission if it could be played at my funeral, as and when that might be. But it's really an incredibly moving piece. Some of it it's really heartbreakingly sad, and other parts of it are just exuberantly joyful. I've probably got a recording of it somewhere that you have. But that it's a part of our monastic training and style. So I don't feel a sense of lack not listening to music. And when I do hear music, which I do from time to time, when I hear music now, it has a far more profound effect on me than when I was listening to it all the time. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I've been in the monastery for several decades now, so it's a long time ago. But when I hear a piece of music, like say, I'm at somebody's house and they have Bach on their music system, then it is extraordinarily clear and powerful in a way that it would not have the ability to be if I'm listening to music all the time, because the mind is completely fresh to it, and it's a very open and receptive. One of the things though about music and how we relate to it culturally, and of course everyone's is not going to be the same, but oftentimes people use music as a substitute for meditation. So it takes us to the place that meditation takes us to. So when the mind is absorbed in a piece of music, there's energy, there's harmony, there's integration. Maybe unless you're listening to someone like John Cage or Stockhausen, or something a little bit more kind of deliberately jangled or weird. But essentially, when the mind is absorbed in a piece of music, then there's rhythm, there's harmony, there's energy, and there's presence. The mind is with that sound, and those are the very qualities that we practice meditation for as well. So in a way, music takes you to the place that meditation is also designed to do. But meditation, you can do it without having the hardware. And you don't need to have the sound coming in to take you to that place. And in a way, to me, it's why you see half the world with little kind of white cords hanging out of their ears, because people want to be in that place of focus and energy and harmony and integration. So they're listening to the music of their choice because they want to be there. But then, if they haven't got that, then they feel bored or restless or incomplete. And so that the great blessing of meditation is that you can develop that in a sense, the awakening to those qualities, irrespective of the sense input. So you can access that same quality of presence, integration, balance, and energy, and focus without having to have a particular thing that causes it. So that's my little thesis on music.
Can I add something?
Sure, please.
That apparently the story goes that young Mozart, when he was very young, was sent to bed early, and his parents were having a sort of party gathering of musicians downstairs. And young Mozart came down about 10 o'clock at night, something like that, and said, "Mummy, Daddy, I can't sleep because of the music." And he was told, his mother said, "But darling, we stopped playing because we knew you were sleeping. We stopped playing some time ago." He said, "No, not that music, the music in my head. It won't stop."
I could believe it.
I compare myself to Mozart, but I do hear a lot of music all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't need a CD for it. It's nice when there is a CD.
How about switching it off?
Oh, I don't want to switch it off. It doesn't interfere with me. I just accept it. Sometimes I let it go. Sometimes it persists, but it's never bothersome.
Well, that's always the thing to go by, is what creates suffering and what helps, what causes suffering to end. And that for myself, the kind of music I listen to, that when I was in the first couple of years I was in the monastery, it was constantly playing in my head, or every record that I had, every hours and hours and hours listening to the radio, because I always had music on all the time. So it was instantly replaying, and everything I saw, everything that I heard, or every conversation was a cue for a song, like one of those Bing Crosby and Bob Hope movies. That sounds like a cue for a song. And it was over and over and over. So I didn't have an equanimous attitude towards it as you do. It was a much less elevating music, mostly. But that's we work with the conditioning that we have, and the main thing is suffering, the ending of suffering, and that seeing how the mind creates dukkha, and if there's dukkha being created, then let go, and if there's no dukkha, then enjoy it. Voila, that's life. Enjoy it. The first music I heard was this endless string of Rodgers and Hammerstein's musicals that my sisters had. So that's the first music I have indelibly imprinted in my brain is South Pacific, Gigi, King and I. Sorry if that's going to ruin the evening for for many people, but that's the principle, and I feel it's some people. You're not the first person by any means to ask those kind of questions, but I feel that the principle of renunciation, you're learning to to train yourself to be independent, so that you don't need to have certain things in order to make you feel good, to in a sense help you to recognize that inner wholeness, that inner completeness, and that the renunciation is, in a mysterious way, it's about developing that realization of that quality of wholeness. It's like about not missing anything. By living very, very simply and living without some kind of stimulation, then you learn to find that quality of fulfillment and contentment completely independent of circumstance. And so there's a tremendous freedom in that. So, I'm not denying that you might get a lot from music, but also it's that's the principle that the renunciant training is based on. We are in the chapter on cultivation. It's chapter 12, speaking about the fine analysis of the Fourth Noble Truth. And just to remind people, I'll read the last paragraph that I read yesterday. When we use the insight into play, the plot and the scenario of our activity are not crucial. It's how we act within them that is important. Bringing the stage into the theatre of the mind, we can develop skill in working with thoughts and feelings, activity, calm or confusion. This is liberating. Living in the present does not mean to consider nothing other than the tip of the nose, but that we are able to know plans about the future and memories as arising now, and having only a notional, penciled-in existence. Do we find ourselves panicking or procrastinating? Failures and successes can be appraised and learnt from rather than stored up in memory. This is why, in Dhamma practice, the reference is to skillful and unskillful, rather than good and bad. On this note, one of the points that I frequently make, or it comes up regularly in terms of Dhamma discussion and people's inquiries, is about decision-making, and particularly how decision-making relates to the teachings on anatta, because when you start to watch your mind and you can perceive how the hearing a sound outside the room is something that is not self, doesn't have an owner. It arises, it passes away. It's not who and what I am. That's easy enough. And then bringing it a bit closer, then watching a thought arising and passing away. Well, then our first impression is, well, that's me thinking, or I'm remembering. And yet, with closer examination, exploration, investigation, then that insight into anatta develops, whereby it's recognized, well, yeah, there's a thought that arises and passes away, but calling it mine is extra. It's not really true or valid. What makes that thought more mine than the sound of the bird sitting in the trees and calling? And so then thoughts are a little easier to see as being not self than emotions, but when we also look at emotions of regret or excitement, fear, desire, grief, and so on, that they also feel a lot more personal, and they're woven in together with particular stories and events or memories that are loaded with nostalgia or pain or delight. But yet, when we look at emotion, then in the same way, they can be seen as being not really who and what we are, but that feeling of I and me and mine as qualities added to that. So each layer in, it gets a little bit harder to see, but if it's explored and examined. But in a way, right at the bottom, you get the very the very most sort of tricky or compelling sense of self is around decision making, me deciding, me choosing, and it really feels like even if there can be a quality of wisdom and non-attachment in relationship to emotions and such, it really feels like there's me deciding, and so this particular point about the choosing, decision making, and not self is extremely useful to look at and reflect on, and particularly because we get very invested in success and failure. That we want success, we fear failure. When things go well, then we're delighted and happy, and when things go badly, then it's wrong and it's awful, and we wish it wasn't that way. These are normal. I'm not reading anybody's mind. This is just ordinary in how we work, whether it's something very mundane about whether some comment that you say is pleasing or approved of by people, or whether it's a building that you put up or that people admire, or the building falls down, or people say, "Yeah, did you really design that?" That whether it's small scale or large scale, we tend to get attached to success and failure, and so what is very helpful, as Ajahn Sucitto has here, having a notional or penciled in sense of self in relationship to our plans and choices, and also how it relates to living in the present. So if we look closely at the act of decision making, of choosing, then you can see every single element of it is in the same way. It's also not self, that there's say a particular set of perceptions. We have a thought or we see something, and say we're trying to decide which road to take. Then there's the question comes into the mind, which is the best road to take. We use our vision to assess what's there. We use our memory to recollect what the ways we've been in the past. We use our intelligence to weigh up the different pros and cons, and then so we the vision or sight is not self, memory is not self, thinking is not self, and then when the question is what looks like the best way forward, it's rather than the me, so a sense of me deciding. Then there's a sense of well, this one is more attractive and that one's less attractive, and so the one that's attractive or looks most promising is the one that the attention goes towards, and so we say that I chose that road, but if you break down all the little pieces of it, there really isn't any me that's doing any choosing. And similarly, when it's seen in that way, then there's much less loading around decision making and success and failure, and so that when a choice is made, rather than this is the right thing, I know it's true, it's good, and then identifying with that choice, and then when it succeeds and everything goes well, you go, hooray, look at me, I got it right, and identifying with that. Or, oh no, it's wrong, it fell apart, that was totally stupid, what an idiot, what are they going to think of me? As the mind grasps failure. Instead, when we're making a choice, then it's like, well, this looks like the best way forward, let's try that and see what happens. And then if it goes well, then it's okay, well, this looks like a good direction to head in, let's keep going this way and see if it continues to be useful. Or if it turns into a dead end, or you find yourself on the wrong way in a one-way street, or the traffic is completely sort of stalled on the road. You go, okay, well, it looked good on the map, but this is this is us not going anywhere. Okay, well, that wasn't a very good choice. So then, rather than being born and dying with success and failure, then the mind simply learns from, okay, well, this worked well, or this didn't work well. Okay, duly noted. Let's try something else. If it doesn't work, or okay, duly noted, that looks like it's going well, let's keep going with that. So there's not that ego-centered loading around success and failure. And the other point that I always like to make in terms of success and failure and getting what we want and things falling apart is that I very often invite people to cast your mind back to, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and think of some event in your life that you're extremely happy about, that you got to be accepted to take on a new job, or you moved into a new house, or you finally got a pay rise, or you finally got into the monastery, and then, oh, great, fantastic, at last, and then 5 years later or 10 years later, then you think back and go, oh, I can't believe I was celebrating. I was so happy at that time. What a fool! How could I not have seen that coming? And what you were rejoicing at 5 or 10 years ago, you look back with a sort of head shaking. Oh man, that was a real nightmare. And similarly, things that would be really difficult or painful, or we would call a complete disaster. We get fired from a job, or a relationship breaks up, or someone close to us dies, or we have some kind of life-threatening illness, and things that you would never ask for or choose, and at the time it's really difficult and testing, and you think of it and feel it as a crisis or a disaster. But yet, when you look back from 5 or 10 years after, you think, well, I would never have chosen that, but that actually turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. And this, again, I'm not reading anybody's minds, but does that ring any bells? Or? No? A few. So, when we consider that and let that really into the heart, then what does that say about my success now? Hooray! We got this approval. Then it says, whoa, hold steady. Okay, this is a sweet taste. This is the feeling of getting what you want. Let's see where it goes, and let's not take for granted that this is an absolutely and permanently good thing. And similarly, when there's a crisis or things fall apart or we have some kind of crack up, then rather than that getting lost in the grief and the suffering of that, in exactly the same way, say, okay, well, this is exactly what I didn't want, and here it is. So what do we learn from this? Or I wonder what this will turn into, or what will come forth from this broken thing. And so that that whole way of relating to this is good, that's bad, this is a success, that's a failure, it comes into a whole different light when it's appreciated from the position of anatta. So, to continue. The key problem, again, is ignorance, unknowing. This is the third outflow, requiring no conscious effort and no attention. So the third of the asavas, the outflows of the mind. The first two were kamasava, the outflow of sense desire, and then bhavasava, the outflow of becoming. Ignorance is the view of a mind that has not been matured by insights into the Four Noble Truths. For example, knowing how surprised we are, and sometimes even shocked, that things go wrong, that there are misunderstandings, that pleasant relationships come to an end. Yet, that is always the way it is. Why do we assume otherwise? Because of this outflow, this irrational assumption. This is ignorance, the refusal to develop a mature response to dukkha. Also, within that, one of the definitions of right view, samadhi, is seeing things in terms of the Four Noble Truths, or sometimes translated as understanding the Four Noble Truths, but that can be misunderstood to mean comprehending what the words of the Four Noble Truths mean. But more right view is sort of the view of seeing things through the lens of the Four Noble Truths. So rather than I'm talking, or I'm feeling, or I'm walking, or I'm eating, or I'm hearing, and the attention on the particular detail of the activity, or even whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, but instead to see things through the lens of the Four Noble Truths. Has dukkha arisen? If it's arisen, what's its cause? So whether the mind is engaged in something internal or external, refined or coarse, active or quiet, all that is sort of put to the side, and the view is sort of reframed in terms of, is there dukkha? Is there not dukkha? If there is dukkha, what's being attached to? If something's being attached to, can it be let go of? If it's been let go of, then does the dukkha end? And so seeing through that particular framework, seeing life through the lens of the Four Noble Truths. So then, as he goes on, how surprised we are that there are misunderstandings, that pleasant relationships come to an end. So either through the relationship going sour, or somebody moving away, or dying, or losing their cognitive faculties, and so on. That ending can come in a variety of ways. It's not just Ajahn Sucitto being sour or negative, but that when the Buddha said, all that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me, that separation can be physical, it can be psychological, it can be emotional, it can have many, many different dimensions. So this is ignorance, the refusal to develop a mature response to dukkha. As we have seen, the shock of dukkha triggers off defense mechanisms in the psyche, the desire to have and to hold on. From that is inferred an identity in terms of the five khandhas. This is what supports all the difficulties of life. Attachment to the five khandhas sets up a self opposed to dukkha and blocks the insight that could transcend dukkha. In that way, this outflow embeds dukkha in the psyche, where it is ignored and left to foster and stimulate further outflows. So that what he's saying is that embedded in the psyche, that taking a view like, I'm unhappy, I'm unfulfilled, I need to have this, I want to get rid of that, and taking all those I ams to be true in an absolute and permanent sense. We usually don't think that through, but they're just sort of the general framework for how we see life. I need to get rid of this, or I've got too much of that, or I need more of this, or I'm too much like that and I want to be more like the other. And that taking those identification habits to be absolute realities, then that, as he says, it embeds dukkha in the psyche, and it's left to foster and stimulate further outflows. Like, I'm unsatisfied, so therefore I've got to find something that will satisfy me. This thing isn't quite working, so I need a different thing, or more of the same thing. So that sense of lack or insecurity then feeds the hungering for other kinds of outflows, the outflow of sense desire or the outflow of becoming. Hence the enormous emphasis, as in the Satipatthana teachings, on applying clear knowing even greed, fear and doubt in an impartial way. That knowing has no self-interest, yet uses the mind keenly and without distraction. We replace, in a moment-by-moment way, ignorance with knowing. So, and also, and maybe just to go back to that idea of right view as being seeing things in terms of the Four Noble Truths, it's not trying to see suffering everywhere, like trying to, in a way, make ourselves be miserable, but rather sort of reframing the way that things are seen, and essentially learning to not take everything personally. And so rather, just in the most basic ways, rather than I'm suffering, to consider, well, there is suffering. Or that reframing is, in a sense, just bringing the attention to that I-making and mind-making habit. What's in Pali is called ahankara. Ahang means I am. Karoti is to make. Mamang is mine. So I-making and mine-making tendency. And so that that seeing of how the mind personalizes things like me and my problems, or me and my hopes, me and my fears, me and my regrets, to instead the Buddha mind, the quality of wisdom, the awake mind, seeing the way things are. So that was a very, very common theme of Luang Por Sumedho's teachings. If you go through the anthology, the 5-volume anthology of his teachings and all his different writings and talks, you'll find that as a very regularly repeated theme, to change the paradigm, as he puts it, make a paradigm shift from me and my problems to the Buddha seeing the Dhamma. The way of cultivation is described in terms of an eightfold path. Throughout his teaching career, the Buddha gave many methods and elucidated numerous factors that would support awakening. But in this Dhamma tour of the Eightfold Path, our scope is limited to guidelines of action, meditation, and developing an understanding that is selfless. Cultivating these in terms of daily life requires a dynamic and ongoing teaching, ideally with reference to a trusted spiritual friend. The painting attempts to convey this as the way to a joyous life. Although the encouragement to sustain knowing as the principle for awakening may sound ineffective, and the reflections on sense restraint may appear quite chilling, a mind that does not flow out into proliferation and grasping at what is ephemeral is both glorious and normal. Then he quotes a passage from the Samhita: "They do not repent over the past, nor do they brood over the future. They abide in the present, therefore they are radiant." And also that passage, a very beautiful little comment of the Buddhas. So, they do not repent over the past, nor do they brood over the future. They abide in the present, therefore they are radiant. So that's a very helpful little snapshot. And so as you see, the whole tone of this painting is one of spaciousness and light and kind of ease and peacefulness. And also the deer down in the corner, Discourse was given in the deer park in Varanasi, but also the Buddha uses that analogy of a deer as part of the same kind of phrase. He says they are clear. Their faces are those who practice the Dhamma. They are at ease. Their faces are bright. They are relaxed and at ease with themselves, with minds like the wild deer. I can't quote it exactly from memory, but using that kind of quality of freedom and ease, like a wild deer in the forest or grazing out in the meadows, as a sort of a symbol for the free and awakened mind. The Buddha and his enlightened disciples, who had realized the cessation of dukkha, impressed people by their serene countenance. Oh, here we go. Cheerful, clearly rejoicing, with minds like the wild deer. You might have guessed I don't actually prepare these before I do these commentaries with you all. It's all fresh off the page. They did not drag themselves along in life, faded out and fed up with everything. It could not be that way. As you begin to see how suffering is compounded, you know that the cessation of suffering could only be realized by a sharp and agile mind and a gentle, patient heart. When the mind is liberated from craving and stops trying to get things up for itself, when the mind is liberated from craving and stops trying to set things up for oneself, then it radiates compassion, kindness, serenity, and joy at the well-being of others. The fire of desire has become a light of radiance rather than a consuming flame. This is the natural mind, the way we act when we are not confused or distracted. When we are truly at ease, our inclination is to be loving and wise. So he again he's echoing that same point I was making about the transformation in terms of energy of the fire of tanha, of craving, and symbolized by that the heat of the burning senses all is burning, the eye is burning, the ear is burning, and nose, tongue, body and mind, they are burning with greed, hatred and delusion. And that transformation of that, the energy of our being into light, and as you have in these threefold analysis of each of the four truths, Chakung Udapadi, Chakung vision arose, Jnanang Udapadi, knowledge arose, Panya wisdom arose, Vijja knowing arose, Aloko Udapadi, light arose. So the visions, the images of vision and light there to replace to be the transforming of that energy of agitated heat and clinging to the quality of non-clinging and freedom and light rather than heat, and also nibbana meaning coolness. So you have fire and heat being transformed into light and coolness. Now, one particular point in this, particularly in reference to that quote, they do not repent over the past, nor do they brood over the future. They abide in the present, therefore they are radiant. So that's a frequent theme in the teaching, is this dwelling in the in the present moment. And as John Lennon was misquoting Samuel Johnson, life is something that happens while you're making other plans. I'm not quite sure where Dr. Johnson wrote it, or in which song John Lennon wrote that, his version of it, but it's a painfully accurate summary. Life is something that happens while we're making other plans. And it's so easy for us, particularly in this culture where we spend a lot of time dwelling in our thoughts, to be going off, revisiting the reconstructed past, or creating an imagined future and going off and inhabiting the futures, and missing life as it's happening, because life only happens now. And that if we're so busy with what it's going to turn into, according to our hopes and fears, and what it was before, dwelling on our nostalgia or our regret or our and our memories, then we miss the actuality of life. This is where we can make a difference, and also this is where the Dhamma is here and now. It's not just over there. It's not like in an hour's time when we can get back into the temple. It's the Dhamma is apparent here and now, sanditiko akaliko, apparent here and now, timeless. And so the mind that's always looking over there, often to the future, often to the past, is therefore necessarily missing the reality of the present. And so that theme of the Buddha about not dwelling on the past or brooding over the future, that is a very regular one. There's a sutta in the middle-length discourses called the Baddhakarata Sutta, where he makes a very, very similar point. And it's a very well-known teaching that the letting go of the past, not creating the future, and also not creating ideas based around the conceit of identity, of self here in the present moment, that is how that quality of brightness, that quality of say real liberation is realized through the mind paying attention to what is. You can't be with the reality if the mind is inhabiting creations about the past and the future. It's necessarily not with the real, because it's absorbed in the stories of the past, the stories of the future. So, but obviously memories arise, plans arise, expectations arise. That's completely normal. But the mind that knows this is a memory, this is the mind conjuring up a memory, or being, say, visited by a resonance of an event of our childhood, or a memory of what we did last week, or the house that we grew up in, or plans for the future that you've got arrangements that are made, and how's that going to work out, or what's it going to be like when you go to such and such a place or travel to that country. That if the mind is aware, this is an expectation, this is a plan, that this is a recollection, then there's no delusion or no problem with that. That is easily kind of understood and known. It's when the mind absorbs into, or say is born into plans and memories and fears and regrets and so on, that then the kind of the dukkha mill starts turning. Well, the means of working with this fourth truth is that of cultivation. That's the title of this chapter. So, bhave tabanti, it is to be cultivated, it is to be developed. Bhavitanti, it has been developed. And so that that development of a path is rather like when a path, you first find out where you want a path to go, and then it takes some time to sort of clear away the brush and to get the path level and to work on the path so it's easily traversed and it doesn't have any pitfalls or obstacles and such like on it. So this in a way, the spirit of this fourth truth is the development of the path, the kind of helping that you know what the way forward is. There's the letting go has been seen to if the grasping stops, then dukkha ceases. Okay, that's the direction the path needs to go. Okay, that's the liberating insight. When there's grasping, that creates dukkha. When the grasping stops, the dukkha stops. Okay, that's the path. That's the direction. So then the path, having got the direction or that being clear, then that path needs to be developed, because it's easy to, if the path is not very well developed, then it's much easier to lose the way or to trip over things or to fall into holes and such like. So that the spirit of the fourth truth is that the seeing where attachment happens in all these different domains of our life is the development of the Eightfold Path. So where we get lost in terms of sila, in terms of our speech and actions, how we can develop a sense of where attachment, where clinging is happening, and where that can be let go of in terms of our sila. In terms of meditation, yesterday I was talking about these various different meditation illnesses or delusions, like sanya vipalasa, the wrong grasping of mind and meditation states, and the vipassana upakilesa, the defilements of insight. So the development of the path, in a sense, is getting to know where those habits of clinging can take root in terms of sila, in terms of our action and speech, in terms of the meditation, in mind training with the development of samadhi, and then also with wisdom, that the mind can also grasp, grasping views and opinions and the whole reason and methodology of practicing Dhamma, so that those wisdom factors of the Eightfold Path, samaditi, right view, and sama sankapo, right intention or right resolution, that is also seeing where clinging and attachment identification can get rooted with those aspects of view and intention as well. If they are wound up with clinging, with attachment, with delusion, then they're going to be causing an obstacle. Because just as I was quoting Luang Por Chah the other day about being right in practice, being right in fact and wrong in Dhamma, this is a very very common problem. It's an obstacle that we run into very, very regularly. And so the development of the path, in a sense, is learning how to practice Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. So the Pali for that is Dhamma Anudhamma Patipada. So that's also one of the aspects of stream entry, is that the practice of Dhamma is in accordance with Dhamma. It's not practice of Dhamma in accordance with my preference or my fears or my opinions. So that element of cultivation, because we can so easily, and this is such a common human problem, we take something that's good, and then through our sincere and vigorous attachment to that goodness, we thereby make it bad. It ends up causing us and others harm. I just came across a new term I'd never met before, and I'm trying to remember what it is now. It's something like orthophagy, and it's an obsessive attachment to healthy eating. And there was a little article I was reading about a discussion about should this be actually classified as an eating disorder, the obsessive attachment to healthy eating. And it was a serious article. Yeah, healthy eating, good, yes, but then the obsessive attachment to it, then it can create all kinds of difficulties and a lot of suffering. That the mind can get so purist that you see something that doesn't fit your particular food program, and then you can really suffer a lot. I remember many years ago there was when I was living up at Harnham in the early 80s, there was a fellow who came and stayed at the monastery who was very into macrobiotics, and one of the Anagarikas it was a very small community. There was only 3 or 4 of us there, and so one of the Anagarikas was cooking the meal that day, and this fellow came into the kitchen and saw that he was cooking eggplants, eggplant aubergines, and he said, "You can't give those to people. Don't you realise what they are?" I said, "Well, they're eggplants." but don't you know? In his particular universe, to eat eggplant was like a kind of a sort of metabolic suicide. It's the most terrible. It's kind of hyper yin food. You can't possibly give that. Do you realise what happens to everyone if they eat those? And he said, "I think you're going to tell me, aren't you?" But it was in his universe, the eggplant was something that was unacceptably awful. To the Anagarika, it was just, well, somebody brought some eggplants, fine, we'll cook that, put that. We'll cook those and put those out, nice vegetables, fresh, okay, fine, no problem. So that, I mean, I was a junior monk there at the time, and this fellow was sincerely upset. He was just like, Ajahn, it's begging. I wasn't the Ajahn, I think it was Ajahn Dhamma was the senior monk then. He said, "You can't allow this, Ajahn." He was really anguished about this sort of eggplant dish, and Ajahn Dhamma, who is one of those people that gets more level-headed the more shrill people get with him. So, very sort of cool Canadian, unruffled quality. So he just, well, if you don't want to eat it, that's fine. But it's all right by me. That's offered with sincerity. It's quite appropriate. If you've got a problem with them, then fine. You don't have to have them. So I'm not making fun of that bloke, but just how something that we feel is good and right, the way that the mind attaches to it, and it's almost worse the more evidence you've got to back up your thesis. You've got proof. That's deadly. That you're kind of, well, look, no, you don't understand, Ajahn. Look, you see, look, there's these articles that have been written about this. They've done studies. They know that this is awful, or it shouldn't be that way. And it's not just food. Obviously, it can be in every other area. Typography. Ajahn, you can't print that. It's awful. What is it that's awful? Well, look. What am I looking at? Look, the bar over the A is completely wrong. It's not centered over the A, Ajahn. Oh, well, yeah. If you use a magnifying glass, but for someone who's a typographer, it's like jumps off the page and screams at them and says, "You can't print that, Ajahn. It's like offensive to the Dhamma." Okay. So, yeah. that way that we have of taking goodness and beating other people up with it is something to be really alert to. And this aspect of Dhamma Anudhamma Patipada, practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma, is very central in what I've been saying about the difference between practicing based on self-view and practice based on right view, or practice based on right effort. Is really about that. It's like learning how to develop that, practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma, Dhamma Anudhamma Patipada. Because as long as that's not in place, then that's always going to be, even our most sincere and committed efforts are going to be obstructing realization. So that's one of the factors of stream entry, is Dhamma Anudhamma Patipada. So if that's not in place, then stream entry is impossible. So that it's an important area of practice, and so that in terms of the working with this on a practical level, what is useful is to make a deliberate point, a specific point, whenever you know you're right, whenever you want to use the word actually, then take a step back, count to 10. Hang on a minute now. I know I'm right. Now what am I doing with this rightness? How am I relating to this rightness? And how am I respecting the other person's rightness? Because they're seeing something different. Now, I know I'm right. Okay, now that's, in this moment there's this feeling that I know I'm right. Fine. Now, how does that relate to the other people around me and the situation that I'm in? How are they seeing it? Does my rightness match their rightness? Or have they got a different version? An easy example I often use is say, okay, which direction is my finger pointing? Left or right?
Who's looking?
Indeed. So it's like, to me, it's pointing to the left. Yeah. To you, it's pointing to the right.
So which finger?
There's always a clever one. That's the finger. The pointing is to do with that one sticking out. There's always one in every crowd. Thank you, Marianne. Someone had to say that. So that you look at it one way, it's pointing to the left. You look at it from the other side, pointing to the right. It's the same. It's the same thing. But we're just seeing it in different ways. And I grew up with two elder sisters who see the world in very, very different ways. And they're very dear people, they're my sisters, we're close to each other. But where one sees green, the other sees blue. And it's like, it's green, it's blue, it's green, it's blue, it's green, it's blue, it's green. And so that different versions of the world, it's in a way it's a simple principle, but the more that can really be taken into the heart, then the more we're able to appreciate other people's perspectives and to get along with each other. Because if we believe in our rightness, say, but I'm right, and take that to be an absolute truth, then necessarily we're going to be in a state of friction or dislocation with others. It just has to be that way. But when we, in a sense, look at the actuality of the experience, that this is my feeling that I am right. That was this feeling has arisen. That's in a way the mental event that has arisen there. Okay, there is this feeling that I am right. True. That feeling, we can say, has arisen. We can describe it in that way. Fair enough. And then we have some space in the mix, and we can accommodate others and say, oh, that's really interesting that you think that way, Ajahn, because that seems completely wrong to me. And I see it this way. You go, oh, really? Oh, wow. never even thought of that. And so then we can be interested and surprised by others' point of view, rather than being threatened or intimidated or aggressive or defensive about someone having a different view than being interpreted as an attack. So then when the things are related to in this way, then otherness and other ways of experiencing things or seeing things, they're interesting, or they have a quality of mystery to them. Like, oh, well, that's different, rather than how dare you? Who do you think you are? And back off. And those kind of aggressive or defensive reactions, because that fixity of I'm right, this is absolutely true, is always being fed by ego-centered thinking, by self-view. Whereas when the things are seen more in terms of the actuality of an opinion arising, and that can only be a convenient fiction or your particular perspective, then the situation is not being held in a self-centered way. It's more being seen in terms of nature, and there's a broadness of view, and so that when the unknown or the unfamiliar or the different is met from that openness of heart, when it's met without self-view being the dominant characteristic, then the unknown or the different is met with a quality of wonderment or mystery. Oh, that's interesting. Rather than how dare you, or what do you mean, or like, don't say that to me, and so that then we are able to live with other points of view or things that are not understood or mysterious or unknown or uncertain, without that having the result of feeding anxiety or friction. So that's the end of that chapter, and I'll leave it there for today. We have the hordes of Mara come onto the scene next, but that won't be for a couple of days. So anyway, please, if you have... well, of course, they might be here already. Mara's very diligent in his work. So if there's any particular questions or comments, clarifications, please.
What you said fits so much to something which happened to me not so long ago. I was watching a documentary, I think it's called Good Food, Bad Food, where they kind of explain how the so-called Green Revolution, which in the agriculture, is that in fact destroying the balance, the aliveness of the earth, and making the earth, or the agriculture and the farmers and everybody completely dependent on the industry which produces all these chemicals. So they actually destroy they have brought up this idea of green revolution really in order to destroy the balance in nature, because then they can earn money with trying to let something grow again. And so the more they do it, the more the nature gets out of balance. And so they were kind of showing pictures, and I think,
when you say green revolution,
call it green revolution, but it's actually only after the First World War and all these pesticides.
Oh yeah.
What they used to gas the Jews and in the concentration camps, and lots of that stuff. So they had to do something with it. And so they invented that could be used to kill insects. I mean, I think in your book you write something about, in Finding the Missing Piece, you write a little bit about that
destroying pests, yes.
How they actually, how do you say, they create new pests.
Yeah, they're usually about, the pesticides are usually about, well, this last I read about it was about 18 months ahead of the development of the insects, that they keep mutating to accommodate the next level of pesticide.
So they become resistant, and they actually breed
super bugs, yeah.
You know, and so with the earth, it's similar. And so there are obviously some people who know about it and try to re-establish a more balanced way. No plowing. They said plowing is a myth, but it's nearly impossible to stop that because it's a myth. So plowing actually destroys the balance in the ground. And when I was watching it, it was all very. It seemed to be absolutely right, you know, what they said. But I could also see the hopelessness, you know, when you look at the political situation in the countries about, you know, the politics about agriculture and whatever. And I thought, God, you know, yes, but at the same time something was kind of, don't buy it. You know, because it all comes kind of wrong. And I mean, it's true, you know. I just said, how do I live with that without making my life terrible? Can I only say to myself, well, you know, you can't save samsara with samsaric means. You know, it's meant to go. I mean, pear-shaped in a way. And there might be good phases, you know, but it's. I can really see that there are people who really try their best and they work hard, and I don't know, you know, you want to support them in a way, but at the same time, I start to see, you know, the kind of hopelessness of it. So how to communicate that without being negative, you know? Or you can just say, well, the only way out is, you know, the only real green revolution is Buddhism.
These are big questions. I think one of the aspects of this theme is how much difference, you know, wisdom makes. That you don't inflate your ideals like, oh, if you do it this way, then everything's going to be fixed. Rather, well, this looks like something that might be helpful. Let's try this and see where it goes. Rather than making promises that can't possibly be fulfilled, or on the one hand, or attaching to the idea of it's all totally hopeless, there's no point doing anything, we might as well just sort of curl up in a ball and fade away. But neither of those are really in accordance with Dhamma, I would say, because, you know, the Buddha knew that, you know, all things are unsatisfactory, but if you look at his teaching and also our way of life, there's a huge, massive amount of emphasis put on the skillful means of creating wholesome situations, and so that where you can make a difference, like with a doctor, everyone's going to die, but it's kind of sensible to look after the bodies as well as you can along the way, so they're as comfortable as possible, as functional as possible. We are all going to die, yes, guaranteed, 100%, but it makes a difference. The skillful means that we use along the way that provides living situations that can be, used in ways that are beneficial to ourselves and others. So even though all conditioned things are unsatisfactory, the so much of our Vinaya rules and the Dhamma teachings are all about skillful means to tweak the conditioned realm as much as possible to create a conducive environment for awakening, and for a way of life and a living situation that's going to put as much of the odds in our favour as possible to conduce to liberation and to harmonious and respectful relationships between beings. And so it's that interesting and beautiful balance of saying, yeah, all things are unsatisfactory, but if conditions are arranged in such a way, then genuine changes can be made. Like the very first appeal to the Buddha by the Brahma Sambhati is saying, if you take your insight and you offer it to people, beings will be liberated, and they won't be if you don't do that. And so he responded to that by teaching for 45 years. And so that I would say that is through making that effort to teach, then that really brought about genuine changes, substantial and permanent changes in the lives of many, many beings. And so as we're the inheritors of that 2,500 years later. So in exactly the same way, we can make a difference. So, and as human beings, we have a big variety of choices that are possible, and that the more wisdom, this is my subjective opinion, is that the more makes, the more the choices that are made are really in tune with reality, then generally the more benefit that comes from that, and the less damage that is caused. The difficulty, the disharmony in the system, almost invariably comes from that quality of clinging, upadana, like attaching. If you do this, I guarantee you're going to get this result, or that sense of this is the right way, that's the wrong way, and that, and if you don't agree with me, then you're in jail, or you're disenfranchised, or we're going to take your farm away from you because you can't do that. And so, obviously, the whole domain of politics and agribusiness and that is a huge area of concern, and I'm certainly not that knowledgeable in it. But just as a basic principle, that in terms of working in the world and relating to others, then the more wisdom we've got in the mix, then the more those changes are going to be brought about in a good way. Like as an example, it's kind of in the same theme. Many years ago, I was introduced to Bill Ford of the Ford Motor Company, and at that time he was just in charge of Ford's. He was like a great grandson of Henry Ford, who founded Ford Motors, and he was in charge of the charitable arm of Ford Motor Company, which in a way sort of wasn't letting him do anything serious, but he was involved in the company decisions. But they were bringing him in. They asked him to take more of an active role, and he eventually became the president of Ford's and the head of the whole company. So I met him because Richard Smith knew him, and I was teaching in Detroit, and Richard said that Bill wanted to meet me, and Richard had given him a few Ajahn Amaro books, and he was very inspired. And so I went to his very, very fancy house and met him and his family, and it was this really interesting conversation because the theme of it was along the lines of, well, I'm a great-grandson of Henry Ford, and I'm in the company, and they're trying to get me to sort of take responsibility. And before, they used to laugh at me because I was sort of very eco-friendly and cared about the welfare of the workers. And when there was a fire at one of the plants, there was a big accident at one of the plants in Detroit, then he went straight to the plant where the accident happened to be with the workers who'd been injured. So he was sort of made fun of because he was too kind of nice and kindly and eco-friendly. But then now they wanted to bring him in and sort of put him front center and give him a lot of power. And so the conversation was around the theme of, well, this is really awful. I don't want to have to do this. I just want to move with my wife and kids into the woods in New Hampshire and grow lettuces and cabbages and let my kids grow up in the woods and they go to the Waldorf school, and won't that be a fine thing? And you agree, obviously, don't you, Ajahn? And to my surprise, I didn't agree with it. And so what I said was, I can understand you wanting to sort of to bail out of the whole thing, and the auto industry must be really very stressful and difficult, and for someone who's obviously a very kind and sincere and thoughtful person, caring person. So, but you are the great grandson of Henry Ford, and they are putting you in a very powerful position. They do want to do that, so that gives you a lot of capacity to make some useful changes, and so that it could be that by asking you to be the head of the company, you can have the opportunity to help steer it in ways that are beneficial, and that even though it is a huge corporation and responsible for a lot of pollution and such, perhaps being given that kind of authority, you can use it in a skillful way. But he didn't want to hear that. So there was a little bit of frisson there, and but he wasn't upset, but it was just he was surprised. But I was kind of surprised as well to hear myself saying that. But it seemed really clear to me that was a good perspective, and I was interested to see he did stay with the company, and he did also introduce quite a few changes, and they they have a big line in more eco-friendly vehicles, and he's also tried to steer the company in skillful ways, and as well as helping it to stop being bankrupt, and so that that sense of working in the world and having a skillful influence where you can, I feel is very important. Rather than, even though we're monastics here, and that we're sort of professional renunciates, we are still part of the world. We participate in the world, and we affect the world. And so that element of peace through not escaping from contact, but rather peace through right understanding and the use of wisdom, then when there's opportunity, then we can have a good effect. If there's no opportunity, then we can leave things alone. And then the wisdom element helps us to know this is the right time to say something, or this is the wrong time to say something. Like if you're walking along St Margaret's Lane and Farmer Blaine is out on his tractor and kind of ploughing up the field, you might think, he doesn't know. He obviously hasn't seen that documentary. I should tell him. And go out to the field, standing in front of his tractor, think, stop. And then you say, and then he's going to think that your friend has passed out on the lane and that you need a phone or something. Say, you shouldn't be ploughing. It's really bad for the soil. That's not going to have a good result.
I could see that, in a way you have to love the people how they are, the way they are.
Exactly.
And there might be an opportunity where...
Yeah, there you're
everything else would be just suicidal.
Yeah, you might be walking across that pathway through the middle of the field, and he's out there ploughing, and he pulls up in his tractor and then leans over and says, "So, sister, what do you think about all this ploughing? You got an opinion? I've always wanted to know what you Buddhists thought about working the land. So, anything you'd like to share with me about this?" Not very likely. It's a non-zero probability. Anyway, I think that's enough for today. And tomorrow's Saturday, so there won't be a reading.